The bystander effect. In 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was murdered in New York City. Reports at the time claimed that dozens of neighbors saw or heard parts of the attack, yet no one called the police until it was too late. This tragedy sparked interest in what became known as the bystander effect. Darley and Latané's classic experiments revealed that when multiple witnesses are present, each person feels less personal responsibility. People think someone else will help. Ironically, the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to act. Today, this phenomenon still plays out, not only in public emergencies but online. When someone is bullied on social media, thousands may watch, but very few will step in to defend the victim. De-individuation. Have you ever said or done something online you would never say to someone's face? That's de-individuation. When individuals feel anonymous, hidden by a crowd or behind a screen, they lose their sense of accountability. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment in 1971 demonstrated this with disturbing clarity. College students randomly assigned as guards quickly began abusing those assigned as prisoners, not because they were bad people, but because anonymity and uniforms stripped away personal identity. This is why riots, online hate mobs, and even seemingly normal people in crowds can suddenly become violent. The dark triad. Not all darkness comes from external pressure. Sometimes, it comes from personality itself. The dark triad describes three interlocking traits: narcissism, an inflated sense of self and constant need for admiration; Machiavellianism, strategic exploitation; cynicism, and cunning manipulation; psychopathy, emotional coldness, lack of empathy, impulsivity, and lack of remorse or guilt. Research shows that people high in these traits often rise in positions of power, but their leadership can be destructive. Behind charm and confidence, the dark triad often hides exploitation and abuse. Gaslighting. Imagine being told, "You're imagining things. You're too sensitive. That never happened." Over time, you begin to doubt your memory and even your sanity. This is gaslighting, a manipulative tactic recognized by the APA. It's common in abusive relationships, where one person gradually rewrites reality for the other. Gaslighting erodes self-trust until victims feel trapped and dependent. In-group versus out-group bias. We humans are tribal creatures. We divide the world into us and them, often on the flimsiest grounds. Psychologist Henry Tajfel demonstrated this in his minimal group experiments. He assigned people to arbitrary groups, like whether they preferred one painter over another, and almost immediately, participants favored their own group and discriminated against the other. This instinct fosters belonging, but also fuels prejudice, racism, and even genocide. When leaders exploit this bias, they can turn neighbors against one another with frightening ease. Moral disengagement. How do people commit cruelty without seeing themselves as cruel? Albert Bandura's concept of moral disengagement explains this. People justify harmful behavior by shifting blame. They brought this on themselves. I was just following orders. It wasn't really that bad. Bandura showed how these mental tricks allow ordinary people to participate in extraordinary violence. From bullying in schools to atrocities in war, moral disengagement is the silent partner of cruelty. Moral licensing. Ever noticed how doing something good can make people feel entitled to do something bad afterward? That's moral licensing. Psychologists found that when people see themselves as good, they unconsciously give themselves permission to bend the rules later. For example, someone might donate to charity, then feel less guilty about lying in business. It's not always extreme, but over time, this mental loophole allows people to excuse selfish or harmful behavior while still feeling virtuous. Confirmation bias in hate. Once someone adopts a hateful belief, the human mind actively defends it. This is confirmation bias, our tendency to notice evidence that supports our views while ignoring what contradicts them. In hate movements, confirmation bias locks people into echo chambers. Every story, every statistic, every anecdote is twisted to reinforce existing prejudice. This is why extremist ideologies are so resistant to change. They are self-sealing belief systems. Authoritarian personality. After World War II, psychologists sought to understand why some people are drawn to oppressive leaders and ideologies. In 1950, Theodor Adorno and his colleagues introduced the concept of the authoritarian personality, a rigid mindset marked by submission to authority, hostility toward outgroups, and a desire for order at any cost. It explains why ordinary people may embrace authoritarian regimes or support cruel policies, not just out of fear, but because deep psychological needs for certainty and control push them toward strict hierarchies. Pluralistic ignorance. Why do people stay silent when something clearly feels wrong? This is pluralistic ignorance, a social phenomenon where everyone privately disagrees with what's happening but assumes others accept it, so they remain quiet. It's the invisible force behind classroom silence when nobody understands the lesson, or in dangerous situations when bystanders don't act because they believe maybe it's not really an emergency. In groups, silence looks like consent, even when it's really fear and doubt. Dehumanization. Dehumanization is the process of stripping others of their humanity, seeing them not as people, but as objects, animals, or enemies. When this happens, empathy fades, and cruelty becomes far easier to justify. History is filled with chilling examples, propaganda that compares groups to vermin, or labels that reduce entire communities to faceless threats. Once people are framed as less than human, violence against them feels not only acceptable, but even necessary. Learned helplessness. In the 1960s, Martin Seligman conducted experiments where dogs were exposed to unavoidable shocks. Eventually, the dogs stopped trying to escape, even when escape became possible. This became known as learned helplessness. Humans, too, can fall into this trap. Victims of chronic abuse, systemic poverty, or long-term failure may stop trying to improve their situation, even when opportunities arise. It shows how suffering can rewire the mind into hopelessness. Cognitive dissonance in cruelty. When people harm others, they face a painful contradiction. I'm a good person, but I just did something bad. Leon Festinger's theory of cognitive dissonance explains how the mind resolves this conflict. Instead of admitting guilt, people change their beliefs. They deserved it. It wasn't really wrong. By reshaping morality, the mind protects itself from guilt, but at the cost of perpetuating cruelty. Social dominance orientation. Some people see the world as a hierarchy where certain groups should rule over others. This mindset is called social dominance orientation, or SDO. Those high in SDO believe inequality is not only natural but necessary. They tend to support systems that keep powerful groups on top while pushing marginalized groups further down. Psychologists Jim Sidanius and Felicia Prado, who developed the concept in the 1990s, found that SDO strongly predicts prejudice, support for oppressive policies, and resistance to social equality. In essence, it's a psychological fuel for hierarchy, oppression, and discrimination. Scapegoating. Whenever times get tough, societies often look for someone to blame. This is scapegoating, the act of unfairly targeting an individual or group as the source of problems. It gives people a false sense of control because it's easier to point fingers than to solve real issues. History is full of examples: the persecution of minorities during plagues, witch hunts in medieval Europe, or blaming immigrants during economic downturns. Scapegoating may unite the majority, but only by creating deep injustice and suffering for the few. Schadenfreude. Why do people laugh at bloopers, gossip about celebrity scandals, or secretly enjoy a rival's downfall? That feeling is called Schadenfreude, a German word meaning harm joy. Psychologists link it to envy and competition. When someone we dislike fails, it boosts our own sense of status. In everyday life, Schadenfreude can seem harmless, like enjoying a funny slip on ice. But at scale, through social media pylons or public shaming, it reveals a darker truth. Sometimes, human beings find happiness in the pain of others. Obedience to authority. One of the most chilling discoveries in psychology came from Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments in the 1960s. Participants were instructed to deliver electric shocks to a stranger in another room whenever they answered incorrectly. In reality, no shocks were delivered. The learner was an actor, but the participants didn't know this. Shockingly, 65% of participants continued delivering shocks up to the maximum level, even when the actor screamed in pain or fell silent. The conclusion was disturbing. Ordinary people will often obey authority figures, even when ordered to harm others. Desensitization to violence. The first time you witness violence, it shocks you. The 10th time, it disturbs you less. Eventually, it may not disturb you at all. This is desensitization to violence, a process where repeated exposure dulls our emotional response. It's why soldiers can endure horrors of war, why media audiences become numb to violent news, and why children surrounded by aggression may grow up seeing it as normal. The danger is that empathy fades, making people less likely to intervene, or worse, more likely to accept cruelty as part of life. Projection. Projection is a defense mechanism where people deny their own flaws by attributing them to others. A dishonest person might constantly accuse others of lying. A cruel person might insist the world is full of cruelty. By shifting blame outward, they protect their self-image. But projection doesn't just distort personal relationships. It can escalate into prejudice and conflict as groups project their own fears and insecurities onto outsiders. It's a way of avoiding inner truth, but it often creates outer harm. Groupthink. Groupthink happens when a group values agreement over truth. Doubts are silenced, criticisms are ignored, and bad decisions go unchallenged. Irving Janis, who coined the term, showed how disasters like the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Challenger explosion stemmed from groupthink. It often starts innocently. People want harmony, no conflict, no friction. But soon, independent thought disappears. When going along becomes more important than being right, even intelligent groups can march blindly into catastrophe. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe and check out our other videos to explore more about psychology and human behavior.